Oh, there I am. Ooh, all right. Once again, I look like I just woke up. All right. Well, hello, everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. This is the show where we like to have that real talk about real things, right? We like to talk about real things when it comes to uh, relationships, when it comes to employment, education, physical health, mental health. We've had topics about homeschooling, disabilities, studying abroad. We've covered a lot of different topics, and today is no different. I am excited about today because I have a repeat guest. Her name is Dr. Ashley Funk, and she is going to talk to us about communication. Ooh, I did not create my banner. Give me a second. Let me do that right now. All right, so she is going to talk to us about communication, right? So I am looking forward to having this discussion and seeing where this goes. So Dr. Funk is no stranger to the show, and I'm excited when the guests return to the hot seat. So I am just going to go ahead and bring her to the stage.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming back. All right, so today we are going to talk about communication. So I am looking forward to seeing where this conversation is going to go. So, I mean, you know the drill by now. So I'm just going to hand over the baton to you and let us know.
Yeah, so communication. So, first things first, everything that we discussed today, just please know that I am a licensed psychologist, but this is not a substitute for therapy. This is just expert advice and information. So, please don't treat it as therapy or use it to diagnose yourself. Please don't do that. So, disclaimer over. All right, so communication. So we communicate with other people in multiple ways. We communicate by the words that we speak, by our facial expressions, our body language. So it's not just verbal, it's also nonverbal. So even if we're not saying anything, we're still communicating to other people. And in that way, a lot of the work that I do is I help teach other people to kind of alter like their body language, sometimes their facial expressions, the tone that they use and how they say things. Cause you can say something, but the way that you say it can convey a very different meaning. And so it's kind of this intention you may have behind what you say, but the impact it has on the other person may be something very different. Hence, sometimes we have miscommunication or misunderstandings. So a lot of the work that I do is, like how you say it, or the words that you use, or the tone that you use, or the volume of your voice, or the body, the stance or posture that you have can really impact, like how people interpret what you're saying or how you're saying it. So, kind of breaking things down a little bit, there are a few things that are very basic. You can kind of learn to read certain social cues or nonverbal cues and use those to kind of alter the way you interact with other people. And a few like tips and tricks that I find really helpful are, you know, how is a person standing? So I'll kind of back up and kind of show you a few things. So if I back up here so you can see a little bit more of my body is if a person, is their arms are open, and they're talking to you, they're fairly approachable. If they lean in a little bit, they're really interested in what you're having to say. We lean in and we lean towards and we get closer to the people that we feel comfortable with or that we like. If we lean back and we move away from somebody, it's kind of that signal of you're a little too close to me, or I'm not liking what you're saying, or It's kind of like giving my distance, giving my space. Now, if you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden you see them do this, you may not realize the interpretation that you're taking of that, but it's kind of, a pretty well-known symbol of, ooh, I just touched a nerve and maybe this person is a little closed off. Because what are we really doing here? If we cross our arms, think of all of our vital organs are right here. So if we cross our arms, what are we doing? We're protecting our vital organs. And we're saying, nope, don't like that. Stop doing what you're doing. Back off. But this is very different than this. So this is more of an aggressive way of saying, stop, you need to back off. Whereas this is more of a timid type of, please stop. I don't like it. You're scaring me, or I'm feeling very intimidated right now. So it's more of a shy way of doing it versus this. Very subtle difference, but very big change. And kind of power stances, I always tell people sometimes just standing in a power stance can be a big deal. So someone who stands like this can be seen as maybe a little unsure of themselves versus someone who stands like this. That's a power stance. If you think of kids' superheroes, how do they all stand? They all stand like this. So that is kind of, that kind of power stance. So, we look at body language and we don't often think about the way that we're standing. And sometimes too, I tell people, if you're talking to somebody and they start doing this or they start doing this, think about that. Your vocal cords. Where are your vocal cords? They're right here. They're right here. Your mouth is right here. If they start doing this, they really want to say something to you, but maybe they're just not saying it. So it may be good time to say, hey, what do you want to say? What's going on? What are you kind of holding back about? And, a lot of times too, I tell people, subtle little things like, where are the feet pointed? Are they pointed towards you? Then, they're giving you your attention. Are they pointed towards the door? And are they like altering their body, towards the exit? Because if somebody you're talking to them at a party and all of a sudden their entire body starts shifting towards the exit, maybe they went out of that conversation. And just kind of noticing these little subtle nuances can be a big deal in social situations. So that's kind of a few things I help people kind of understand in regards to like social interactions and nonverbal communication.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. All right, so you brought up a key point, which is when it comes to communicating with people, it's that famous phrase, read the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty much saying like, all right, look at what's around you. You have to figure out, if it's a good time to do what you're doing by observing what the people around you are doing. So, when it comes to, when to talk to somebody, when not to talk to somebody, whether someone wants to listen to you or not, people won't always vocalize it. And so it's in the body language.
Yep.
So yeah, it's what the body is doing, right? So you could tell if someone is listening to you or not by how, like you said, how they're standing. And what I like to do is sometimes when I get bored, I like tap my fingers, or I play with my fingers, or I'm picking up a pen and I'm playing with it or something like that.
Yeah. And, if we kind of break it down even more than that too, is, communication is a two-way street. It isn't just speaking, it's also listening. So a lot of times, especially in this day and age, because we have so much distraction, there's a difference between listening and actively listening. So listening, I like to say you're kind of like this autopilot. So if you're just listening, you could be multitasking, but you're kind of listening to what the person's saying, or, you're in your own head thinking about the next thing you're going to say. So if you're in your own head thinking about the next thing you're going to say, are you really listening to what the person's saying? Whereas if you're actively listening, you're doing the following things. You're minimizing the distractions. So you're turning off the TV, you're putting the phone down, you're making eye contact with the person, you're facing them. And if they sit there and ask you, and this is a good test to see if the person's really actively listening to you, if they were to sit there and say, hey, did that make sense? What did I just say? And you're able to sit there and reflect back like, oh, if I understand you correctly, you said da 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 da. And you're just like, yeah, that's exactly what I said. Like, you got it. Then you were actively listening. If they ask you, like, what did I just say? And you're just like, well, then you weren't really listening. So, a lot of times those are things I do when, I work with couples, or I work with like a parent and a child. And they're just like, my kid never listens to me. And I'm like, okay, well, here's a good test. Ask them to, if you give them directions and you're like, they didn't get it. And I'm like, well, make sure they got it. Ask them to repeat it back to you. So, a lot of times it is that. And, a good indicator to let the person know, like, I'm really listening to what you're saying is, what I just did when you were talking, I sat here and I nodded because I'm actually listening to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, I get it, or ask questions. So like, oh, that must have been really frustrating. Or, oh, like, so if I understand you correctly, it was this and not this. Ask for clarification. Genuinely act interested. And if you're not interested, then don't pretend. Like, just be like, okay, I don't get what you're saying. And being a speaker as well, there are, quote unquote rules to that. We always have that one friend that probably tells a story and then we're just like, get to the point. But it is a lot of times just kind of knowing what the goal is in that circumstance, because communicating something like, hey, I want to tell you how my day is versus, hey, I have this serious concern or this boundary I want to set, or, something like that. Very different things. And there are different nuances to it and ways in which we have to, communicate that.
Right. And, I mean, I do that with kids too. I'm like, okay, so what did I just say? But, some you won't, I mean, I also would say to be careful with that as well, because they could easily just repeat back what you're saying and not actually be listening, if that makes sense. It's just, I heard your words, and I just repeated what you said. It doesn't necessarily mean they believe it or they really were paying attention. But just want to throw that out there. But yeah, I think it's, well, what you said was pretty interesting in that, and if you are not interested, be honest and actually say, you're not interested. But there's that fear of, I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. So what's the best way to say, I'm not interested, or I don't know about not caring, but I'm not really interested in that.
Yeah. And, I think social norms say we always have to act interested and we have to be polite and, things like that. But we also have to be honest with ourselves in where we're at. So, if you're at work and you have a lot of work on your plate and a coworker comes up to you and they are distracting from your work because they want to tell you something that you're just like, I do not care and I do not have time to listen to this, then you need to be honest about that. And you need to say like, hey, like, I really get you want to share this. However, I have these duties I really need to get done. I'm so sorry, but I need to get back to this. Or, if you have a partner, I'm gonna throw my fiance under the bus. Sometimes he comes to me and he starts talking about his work. He works in IT, or not IT, but he does like cybersecurity. And he'll start talking to me about some cybersecurity stuff that goes way over my head. And I know he sees my eyes start to glaze over. So I was like, don't get it. Layman terms, Like pretend that I'm dumb and I have no idea what you're talking about and just explain it to me like simple in one sentence. like cut to the chase. But it is, sometimes just being honest about that, because if you are not authentically interested, I'm going to tell you right now, that other person knows. They may choose to ignore it, but somewhere they know, because your body language and your nonverbals are going to give it away. They just will. So you need to, in some capacity, be honest, not just with yourself, but with that other person, and say, hey, like, I don't really understand what you're saying, or like, I don't know anything about that topic, so I don't have anything to add, or, that sounds really interesting, or that might be interesting to someone else, but not my cup of tea.
So I guess, so by saying you don't understand something or you don't get something, how does that indicate that you're not interested? Because to me, that just sounds like I'm trying to listen, but I'm not comprehending what you're saying.
So, it depends on, like, if it's something you don't understand versus something you're interested in, like, so it depends. If you're not understanding it, then ask questions. But I guess, like, if you're not interested, you could just say, like, hey, that might be interesting to somebody, but I'm not really interested in that. Or, hey, this is like really boring topic to me. I think it also just kind of depends on your relationship with that person and what you feel comfortable with. Not everybody obviously is going to feel comfortable saying, like, hey, that's really boring. Or I'm not interested in talking about this. I know sometimes, like, I'll say something like, hey, I'm not up for having this conversation right now. Or, like, not something I want to talk about in this moment. And, sometimes we just don't have the capacity to have those conversations. Like, I know sometimes I have clients that are just like, yeah, like, I'm more than happy sometimes to sit and listen to somebody talk at me about something that I could care less about. But if you're having like a really like emotionally exhausting day, or like something happened beforehand that you're just like got you worked up, or like you're not in the right headspace, you're just like, I can't do it right now. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, like, I don't have the emotional capacity to listen to you talk about this, or,
Mm-hmm.
like, I can't attend to what you're saying right now. Or like, I, I've even had some people that are like, I just flat out told my significant other, like, I can't fake being interested in this. Did it go terribly well? Not necessarily. But, sometimes you just kind of have to be honest with the other person and just say, like, I can't give you the attention that you deserve, or I can't give you the, whatever it is that you feel they need in that moment.
So now, what are what are the wrong ways that we communicate? What are things that we do wrong that we shouldn't be doing?
Yes. So there are actually a lot of, I'm actually going to pull something up that I use a lot with people. So there we go. So there are roadblocks to communication. And these are things that, like, when they come up, it is just like communication kind of just goes down the drain. And they really inhibit effective communication. Some of them are very obvious. We're like, most people are just like, yeah, totally get it. I know this is not something that we should be doing. Other things of these, you're just like, yeah, wasn't so, didn't really know about it. So these are roadblocks to good communication. I'm going to kind of minimize this a little bit. Okay. So one of these is blaming. So if you're sharing something with somebody that's bothering you and you start to throw around blame. Blame doesn't help anybody. It doesn't matter, like, if a problem comes up or something goes wrong, it doesn't matter who is at fault. It does not matter. Does not change the situation. Does not help come to a resolution. Does not matter. Like, as much as, like, we want to be right and we want to be like, it's not my fault, it's that person's fault, or it's this, whatever entity's fault. does not matter. You're still in the situation that you're in, and it's still have to solve the problem. Regardless of whose fault it is, you're still responsible for what you're responsible for. You're still in your current situation, and you still have to find a way to fix whatever's going wrong. So blame doesn't help anybody. It just makes everybody defensive. All right, the second one is changing the subject. So if somebody comes to you and they start talking about something and sharing something like emotionally charged, meaning it is an emotional subject of any matter. So to them, it's something important, in other words. And you just change the subject, how do you think that's going to make them feel? Probably not very good. So if they come to you with a concern and they're just like, hey, like, I'm really worried about this thing. And then you respond with, oh, that reminds me, like, this happened the other day and da 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 da. Like, that's super dismissive. And they're probably just like, wow, you just totally railroaded me here. They're not, that's not productive or helpful in the conversation. Or if they come to you and they share this like awesome achievement that they had, and they're like, I won this award and I'm so excited about it. And then you respond with one-upping them, then they're probably just like, wow, okay, way to rain on my parade. Again, not helpful. So a third one is sounding hopeless. So this kind of goes with like the blaming, like if there is a problem that exists and you're working with someone trying to solve that problem, and you approach it as, what does it matter? It's not going to get better. Forget about it. I give up. We're just screwed. Whatever. That is not productive. It's just going to frustrate everybody else because you've just given up and you're not contributing to attempting to solve that problem or come to a resolution. It's not helpful. Another one is communication cutoffs. So this is kind of the my way or the highway. So if everybody doesn't agree with me, I'm not having this conversation anymore. If we can't do it my way, I'm done. So again, not helpful. Sometimes you just have to compromise. Other people have other perspectives and views. They might want to do things other ways. Not everything can be done the way you want it to be done. So sometimes there has to be a little bit of flexibility and leeway. And then another one, defensiveness. So sometimes, this happens a lot in the workplace or with kids in school. If there's a criticism, we get defensive. This is just kind of a reflex for a lot of us. But getting defensive also isn't helpful. And the reason that's not helpful is because we have hurt feelings. And when we have those hurt feelings, then it kind of paralyzes us in a way, and we can't really move forward. And that's why number one, like the blaming is so important not to do, because it creates that defensiveness in whoever we're blaming. Because one, we're pointing the finger at somebody else, and the person we're pointing the finger at is going to get defensive. So then they can't move forward, and we feel like we can't move forward until they take ownership. But then they have put these walls up, and they're just like, I can't do anything. Like, why are you blaming me? And then number 6, denial. So if you think there isn't a problem, then you're not going to try to solve the problem. So if you're in denial and you're just like, well, everything's fine, I don't know what you're talking about, well, then there's no moving forward because you don't think there's an issue. And then 7, long statements. So this is one I see a lot with parents. And the kids equally get frustrated due to this. I see it occasionally in couples as well, where kid does something wrong, they act out, so there's a misbehavior, and the parent starts lecturing the child. But by the end of the lecture, you ask the kid, like, do you understand what you did wrong? And the kid goes, nope. Well, during that lecture, the parent did this. They meandered for the entire lecture. So the actual point got lost. sometimes too, and this happens sometimes in relationships, is when you have that lecturing, what do we kind of say? Like, stop nagging me. So again, also not helpful. Like, be clear, be concise, get to the point, say what you need to say, and stop. The person's going to hear it, whether you think they do or not. They're going to hear it. They're going to either do what you're saying or they're not going to, and that is their choice. And their choice is out of your control. You can only control yourself, you can't control other people. Number 8, this one happens so much. The mind reading assumption. This one wrecks a lot of communication. Other people cannot read your mind. If you don't say it, they don't know it. So if you're sitting here going, well, I don't like it when you do that. Well, what is that? They don't know what that is unless you say specifically what that is. So you're thinking it in your head and you're like, well, they should know what I'm talking about. Well, how would they know what you're talking about unless you actually say it? So don't assume that they know what you're talking about unless you actually speak it into existence. 9, put downs. So again, this is insulting. Calling somebody names. Any demeaning language. Like, well, I better handle it because you don't know what you're doing. That is not helpful to anybody. And if you don't want to be spoken to like that, you shouldn't speak to somebody else like that. 10, sarcasm. Kind of goes with the put downs. Sarcasm has a time and a place. You know, if you have a running joke with friends or something like that, fine. But if you're trying to have a serious conversation, you should know that doesn't have a space there. Because it's not helpful. It's not going to help you get to wherever the end goal of that conversation is. 11, speaking in absolutes. So this is something that I tell a lot of people that I work with. If you're having a conversation and it's a serious or like emotionally charged conversation and the words never or always come out of your mouth or the other person's mouth, that's not a good sign. Because nothing is 100% certain. There are always exceptions to every rule. So if somebody says like, you always, or you never, you know that's not true. So you have to kind of sit and reflect on that and think, okay, am I speaking in absolutes? Because that leaves no room for talking and no room to move forward because you're just kind of telling the person like, I think you're always like this, or I think you're never like that. And there's no room to kind of compromise. And then the last one, talking for other people. Don't put words in other people's mouths. Let them speak for themselves. Don't assume you know what they're thinking. Again, mind reading assumption. Let them speak for themselves. If they're not present, don't speak for them. If they are present, don't speak for them. So those are a lot of roadblocks to communication that I often see.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. You know, as I was hearing you speak, I was like, oh, I do a handful of those things. Um, and particularly with the lecturing part, you know, I've been subject to that as well in my upbringing. So whenever I did something I wasn't supposed to be doing, my parents gave me the lectures, and it's I will say at some point I zoned out after a while. So yeah, I've been subject to those lectures. Um, so I did have a question about the blaming part. My thing is like what if it is their fault? You know, like what if they actually did the thing that they were blaming, that they're being blamed for? So you're saying not to acknowledge that, but to find some sort of solution, or like what
So
if it is the actual person's fault?
Yeah, so I always kind of start with this. So you have to think to yourself, like, if you're entering a conversation, what is the purpose of entering that conversation? Like, what is your goal? And if blaming that person does not serve you as a means of getting to that goal, what's the point? Like, if you know if it's their fault, do you need to verbalize it? So does that get you to the end goal? Like,
Well,
does
and
that help or hurt the situation?
well, what if it maybe the point is not necessarily to fix the situation, but it's to feel better because it's to put somebody down. Not that
And
I'm, not that I'm saying that's a
yeah.
good thing, but that could be a common reason is I just want to put you down, and it's just to make me feel better.
And and that's a conversation to be had. I know in some respects, people are like, one instance that I can think of is somebody's like, well, this person cheated on me. It's their fault our relationship ended. Well, I don't disagree with that. If they committed infidelity and the relationship ended and that was, the breaking point, and you say they're at fault, then yeah, I mean, yes, most likely. At the same time, though, is confronting them, we have that discussion around is confronting that person and saying you're to blame for ending the relationship. I'm like, what is the outcome that you're hoping to get? And what is the likelihood that that conversation is going to get you to the point you want to be at? And sometimes does it make the person feel better? To a degree. Most of the time, not to the degree that they want it to because they're still in the situation that they're in. The person still cheated on them, the relationship is still over, and they still feel pretty cruddy.
Hmm. And with the where would this fit in? Where it's not so much the words that you're saying, but it's also the way it's being delivered. Um, and that when it comes to communication, one of my pet peeves is like you were talking about the criticism. Like I think there's a difference between like criticism and constructive criticism.
Yep.
So I think like one of my pet peeves is if someone has any issues with me, like they'll just say, well, you don't listen, you don't do this, you don't do that. And my then I get defensive, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you were to say like, hey, if you were to speak in a nicer tone, a softer tone, lower your voice, like, hey, I noticed that you do this and you do this and it doesn't really work this way. Like if you speak to me in a professional manner and maybe not so much, I mean, not professional, but like lower your voice,
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about me in front of a crowd, pull me to the side, talk to me in private and say, hey, I noticed that you do such and such and such and I don't like the way that you do that. Like if you if you like with me, if you speak to me in a softer tone, lower your voice, if you're nice about it, I'm more likely to hear you and to listen to you as opposed to like you you do this and you do that and you don't contribute to the group but this and this. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like also the delivery of your message as opposed not not just the message itself. So I'm wondering where does that
Yeah.
fit in terms of like the wrong ways that people communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made like a really good point about like if you're offering criticism to somebody, like don't do it in front of a bunch of other people. Like do it one on one. Like be considerate. It can be, I've heard of a lot of people like they tell me my boss will criticize me or point something out in front of all my coworkers, and that's really embarrassing and pretty demeaning. Like why won't they just talk to me after the meeting? Like why do they
Yeah.
do it in front of other people? Like that's an easy thing to do. Just wait and do it one on one. Takes like no effort. Uh, so Another thing too is there's a rule. When you offer criticism, there's a rule. It's called the sandwich rule. So you always want to sandwich criticism. Positive, negative, positive. So sandwich. So you kind of like more positive than negative. And it's usually more like well received by people. So you want to tell them something good they did. And then you want to do the constructive criticism and then follow it with something good that they did, because they're going to hear it and receive it like more easily. And in regards to constructive criticism too, don't just tell them what they did wrong. Tell them how to do better. Because you can sit there all day long and tell somebody like, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, you did da 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 da. But if you don't tell them how to improve, then they're just going to go, okay, cool. So I'm doing all these things wrong. What now? And it's the same all around. And there's this one phrase that I always tell people to use, and I'm just like, it's pretty robotic when you first start using it, but it gets all the general basics into communication that you really need to start using. And I said, yes, you're going to sound robotic at first, but when it becomes habit, then you can start to use it in a way that makes sense to you and it won't sound so robotic. And it's, I feel, say the emotion, when you, what the other person did, because the consequence or impact it had on you. Instead, I would like you to, and then say specifically what you want them to do instead. And when you use that, you're not only telling the person how you feel, so you're using your words to say your emotion, and you're, saying what exactly the person did that you didn't like, so you're being specific there, and you're saying exactly the impact it had on you. So again, intent versus impact, and then instead, and then you're saying the expectation or what you would like them to do instead. So it's hitting every single one of those points. So, a lot of times people will be like, use your words. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's exactly what you're doing with that one phrase. You're hitting everything you need to hit to communicate effectively.
So let's say I'm having a problem with a colleague, something that happens a lot when it comes to group projects. You always have that one person that doesn't pull their weight, and the other members of the team, they're picking up the slack, right? So what's the best way to communicate to that one person that's not doing they're not pulling their weight?
Yeah, so it might be, I feel frustrated when you do not complete your assigned portion of the group project because we have to compensate for you by doing more work. Instead, I would like you to complete what was assigned to you.
Okay.
It can be more specific depending on details, but
yeah. And then what if that, so then it's another thing. So what if that person gets defensive, right? Do you respond with anger? So now we're talking about continued communication, right? So this is what you said was the initial communication. Mm-hmm. So how do you respond when someone gets defensive, or how do you respond when you don't get the response that you want?
Yeah, so when somebody starts to get defensive, so if you start here and somebody starts to do this, don't do this with them. Because guess what they're going to do? They're going to start to do this, and then you're going to want to do that, and then you're going to do that, and then it's just you're escalating the situation. So the best thing that you can do is if somebody starts to do this, stay here. Stay calm, cool, collected, stay here. Because they're not gonna keep doing this. And if they do, walk away. Don't invite that into your life. Just walk away and just be like, okay, I'm not continuing this conversation. I said what I needed to say. But most times the people, if you stay down here, they're gonna kind of hit their ceiling, and then they're just gonna go back down. So somebody said I learned that working at a call center. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, can't go higher with the customer. Yeah, I'm sure. So I'm sure that working at a call center, do not envy you. So, and it is, it is, you just have to kind of stay down here because that person, if you go with them, they're just going to escalate. And a lot of the time it is finding that way of just maintaining and staying down here. And a good way of doing that and trying to get the person back down to your level is just reflecting back how they're feeling. So if you notice that they're starting to get defensive, they're starting to feel angry, or they're starting to feel like hurt or whatever it is, reflecting that back and be like, I see that you're raising your voice. Are you angry? Or I see that you're getting defensive. Are you hurt? Are you frustrated? What do you need? Or what do you want? Just helping them work through it. Because sometimes people can't work through their own emotions. They just haven't learned for whatever reason, they don't have that capacity. And so just kind of reflecting back to them what you're witnessing can be, so for another word other than defensive. So a good way of doing that is using what you can observe. So I guess for me, because I'm a licensed psychologist, it's easier for me to just use what I feel like I'm seeing and kind of jump that. But to not do that, what are you witnessing? What is factually in front of you, and what can you observe? So you know for certain what's occurring. So for instance, if you're working in a call center and you hear the person raising their voice, or they said a specific phrase or word, reflect that back to them. So I hear you raising your voice. Is there something I can do for you? Or I hear you raising your voice. I imagine that the situation is making you feel angry. Or I imagine the situation is making you feel frustrated. What is it that you need right now? Or what is it that you would like to be done in this moment? So just kind of reflecting that back and giving that person that space to be like, I hear you, I see you. Because a lot of times if a person just feels heard, they're going to do this almost immediately. Because they're going to be like, I feel validated, I feel heard. And they're going to come down. Yes, reflective listening. Yes, absolutely. It's exactly what that is. And that is probably the most helpful de-escalation that you can do. And if you're in person, it could be if somebody starts clicking their pen, or they start bouncing their leg, or they start stomping around or slam the door, you can just say, hey, I see you bouncing your leg. Are you feeling anxious right now? And if you're wrong, that gives them the opportunity to correct you. No, I'm not feeling anxious. I'm frustrated. Oh, so I hear that you're frustrated. What's making you feel frustrated? And, it could be something as simple as well, I didn't want to be here. Or I don't want to be on this phone, or whatever it is, it's allowing them the space to not just be like, oh, this person's trying to hear me, but also giving them the space to correct you if you're wrong.
That's so now and I think that works as well, because it's counseling skills 101, right? So whatever the emotion is, you pointed out oh, I noticed that you I noticed that you're angry, tell me what's going on, so I studied mental health counseling, but it's one of the ways to show that you're listening is to point out things that you observe and to encourage more conversation about that. Oh, I see that you're angry. What's going on? I see is what I'm saying. So is what I'm saying making you upset? Something like that. So what would you say to to people who are married and they're fighting, right? So how
Yes.
does how does that work?
So I actually have a handout that I use with some couples called fair fighting rules. And I basically tell them, I'm like, don't do this. So, there are rules sometimes, like, and a big thing is before you begin having an argument, I say, ask yourself why you're upset. Like, why are you engaging in this argument or this fight in the first place? Because a lot of times with couples, it's not about what you think it's about. So, like, for example, say you come home from work and dishes are piled up in the sink. You start to feel angry and you go to confront your significant other. And you just want to be like, why are dishes piled up in the sink? Like, you always leave, you always leave the kitchen so dirty. Okay, so is it really about the dishes piled up in the sink? Is that really the reason you're angry? And if we dig a little deeper, no. You're really angry because you feel like your significant other never pulls their weight in household chores. So that's what you're really angry about. Not about the dishes, but because you feel like your significant other doesn't do any household chores and leaves them all for you to do, and they're not pulling their weight in the house. So again, ask yourself why you're really upset. Again, another thing, discuss one issue at a time. Only one. Because a lot of times when couples start to argue, it becomes, well, you did this. Oh, yeah, well, you do that. Okay, one thing at a time, like, stay on track. Because if we start to become like accusatory and going back and forth, you're not going to get anywhere. That's not very productive. So, figure out what are we talking about, and we're going to stick to that one topic, and we're not going to digress. We're not going to go off on tangents. We're going to stay on topic. Another one is, kind of like one of the roadblocks to communication that we talked about, no degrading language. We're not going to put each other down. We're not going to call each other names. We're not going to do stuff like that. One, like, if you care about another person and you love them, why would you speak to them like that? Like, that's never okay. So that is one of the things that I tell people. I'm like, when that starts happening, you need to take a time out. And we'll get to that one in a little bit. All right, express your feelings with words and take responsibility for them. So what I mean by that is, again, using that I feel blank, like insert emotion. When you blank, because blank. Use that statement. It's a good way to express how you feel. And you always want to start with the word I. Because think about it. If you start with the word you, what are you doing? You. You're pointing a finger at the other person. That is the best way to make a person go defensive and go, walls up. But if you start with I, you're pointing the finger at yourself, and your message is going to be well received, or more likely to be well received. Take turns talking. Don't interrupt each other. That's a good way to get in a screaming match. Not feel heard, because if you're not taking turns talking, guess what? Neither of you is listening. And if you're not listening, nothing's going to get resolved. So take turns talking. I've actually had couples where I've been like, if you can't take turns talking, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to have a stuffed animal or a talking stick that y'all pass back and forth to take turns talking, or you're going to get a kitchen timer and you're going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and each of you gets 5 minutes to talk. And when the timer goes off, the next person gets to talk. Like, whatever you have to do to make it work, take turns talking. I don't care how ridiculous that sounds. Take turns talking and do what you have to do. Timer, passing a toy, stick, whatever. Take turns talking. No stonewalling. So what I mean by stonewalling is you both have to engage in the conversation unless you have mutually agreed to step away and come back at a later time. So one of you, stonewalling, One of you cannot just end the conversation and leave. That's stonewalling. So you can't just go, nope, conversation over, I'm done, forget it, because it's not going the way that you want it to go. That's not fair to your partner. No yelling. Again, stay here. Don't go like this. Stay here. All right. So this is a big one that people, for some reason, it's like we don't realize that this is an option. Take a time out if things get too heated. So this is not an avoidance or an escape. It is a timeout, as in it is a temporary thing. So take a timeout. If things start to escalate, like yelling, or somebody starts to get like overwhelmed emotionally, and so things are not productive, and you're just like, hey, timeout. Way you do a timeout is someone goes, hey, I need a timeout. This is why I need a timeout. You both agree to come back at a later time and set that time, like specific, to come back, reconvene, and start the conversation again. Again, timeouts are temporary. You have to come back and resume the conversation. It's not an out.
Mm-hmm.
Attempt to come to a compromise or an understanding. So with this, not all solutions are, or not all problems are solvable. They don't all have solutions. So you can come to a compromise for some things, or you may have to just sit there and go, okay, we have to agree to disagree. So we're going to come to an understanding that this is the way things are and we're okay with it. So when it comes to couples, I just tell people, like, sometimes you have to understand what is a deal breaker and what is not a deal breaker. Like, are you okay living with the fact that maybe you don't agree on certain things and you do agree on other things? Because, you know, everybody has differences. Everybody is different from everybody else. But what are those things that you're like, we need to agree on, or it's a deal breaker? You know, what can we compromise on? What can I not compromise on? Know yourself. Know your wants, know your needs, know yourself, know your deal breakers, and know what you can be flexible on. So those are kind of the fair fighting rules that I go over with couples, and I'm like, read it, learn it, put it up somewhere, you know, defer to it if you need to, you know, learn the ins and outs of that.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to highlight a couple of comments before we move on. So this one here, you're talking about, talking to people, as they're when they're feeling angry, elevated. This one says, I find it harder to talk to aggressive people in person. It makes me anxious. And this one here, when you're talking about, when it comes to couples, talk about one thing at a time. So talk about dishes on Monday and maybe wait till Tuesday to bring up laundry. Oh God. Oh God. And also just communicating in general, I think it's just taking the time to listen. And what does that mean? Actually being quiet. So it's letting the other person speak and finish their statements and complete their thoughts. I think, it's I think one of the ways, you know, and one of the way to effectively communicate with people is to actually listen to what they have to say and actually be open to contradiction. Maybe that other person doesn't agree with, what you're saying. Okay, allow them to explain, and sometimes it's difficult with kids because it's like, okay, just do what I say. Well, that might be a work in progress for me, so I don't know about that, but I think just when it comes to other adults, it's actually being quiet, not speaking, let them finish their thoughts, let them finish their statements, and you know let them say their piece. So
Mhm.
I say it's a two-way street. You got to give and you got to take.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. When you're listening, like if your mouth is moving, you're not listening. So, it is very much that it is sometimes you have to be quiet and you just need to listen. And especially with children, yes, you can listen. You don't always have to agree and do what they say because obviously, you are the adult. So you kind of have that executive decision to
Mhm.
make. And you have to take into consideration, like, do they always know what's in their best interest? It depends on their age. Um, but it's kind of like, I want cookies for breakfast. That's not, you may want cookies for breakfast, but that's not necessarily in your best interest. But it is sometimes allowing them that space to know that you are a safe person to talk to and that you will listen, even if it is, like in the end, you will not necessarily agree with what they want or have to say, if that makes sense. Um, so I do think it is kind of setting that standard. Because keep in mind, the way that we communicate and the way that, we listen and we speak and the body language that we put forth, like kids are sponges, especially like young children. They're sponges. We are role models for them. They're going to soak in everything that they see. So the way in which we communicate, they're going to take that in and learn from that.
Yeah. So the way that we're setting the example for our children. So the way that we communicate, with the people in our lives, our kids are going to pick that up, and they're going to communicate with other people like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. So I just want to make this last comment because it looks like we're about to go overtime. So just going back to the dishes part, like, oh, he doesn't do the dishes, and you're saying he doesn't do his weight in no, not, I don't want to assume it's the guy, but my spouse doesn't, pull his weight when it comes to household chores. Like, is it safe to say, look for other things the spouse can do? Like, is it safe to negotiate and say, you know, want just hire a maid, or hire a butler or something like that, or call TaskRabbit, to adjust that. Well, but I can see that as being a financial issue. But is it can you is it good to compromise and say, all right, he doesn't pull his weight in household chores. Okay, let him. Okay, find. I keep saying him. I'm sorry, my
That's
spouse.
it.
Um, to find something that that they can do. Okay, so my spouse doesn't do chores. Okay, well, my you'll handle the bills, or you'll handle the groceries, or something like that. Is it good to compromise in those situations or not?
I think it's figuring out what you're okay with. And, I always tell people first, like, again, going back to the assumptions, like, assume that they don't know any better first. You know, give them the opportunity to do what you want them to do. So, first bring up, hey, I would like you to do XYZ. Give them the opportunity to do that. And if, for whatever reason, like they're not capable of doing the household chores or they're not willing to do the household chores, then what is the next step that you're okay with doing? And if that is, okay, well, then I have these other things on my plate. Are you willing or capable of taking some of those other things off of my plate? And, whether that is something financial or maybe something, outside of him, like running errands or something of that nature, then delegate those things. Find what it is that you're willing to do, because it kind of goes back to what are your wants, your needs, your preferences, and working as a team to alleviate that pressure that you're feeling. Because if you feel like you're taking on too much and it's just kind of coming out in that household chore aspect, then you need to alleviate the pressure. And, in the most basic rooted sense, you feel like your partner is not helping you alleviate that. So, there needs to be some delegation in some form or sense. And whether that's through the household chores or through another means, doesn't really matter as long as that alleviation of pressure occurs.
Yeah. So find something that you're okay with.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're saying, yeah, definitely get to the deeper issue. It's not the dishes, he doesn't pull his weight. I keep saying his, I'm sorry for the gender bias. I apologize. That my spouse, doesn't pull their weight in the home. And it's like, okay, so you're feeling like you're doing more than what the other person is. So you're feeling an imbalance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what, let's talk about that. You're feeling like you're doing oh, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so it's what can we do to find a balance and what can we do to restore order? So maybe not household chores, it might be something else, but what can we do to restore order?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it is, what ultimately is the solution that we both can agree with and we both feel is best moving forward. And regardless of what that is, both parties or whoever is involved has to feel good about that at the end of the day. And it doesn't really matter what other people think. It's just, like I said, both parties have to feel good about it at the end of the day, and it has to be a adequate solution.
There you go. And that's what communication is all about. So finding ways to get to common solutions or something that both parties can live with. All right. Dr. Funk, do you have any parting words that you'd like to give us?
Um, there's so much. There's so much to say. Yeah. So I guess the big thing to keep in mind is, communication is multi-layered. It's not just what you say. It's how you say it. It's nonverbal and verbal. It's your body language, your facial expressions. Just take that all into consideration.
All right, there you go. All right, Dr. Funk, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for sticking it out. I know we're over time, but thank you so much for sticking it out. All right, so let me get your contact information up on the screen. All right, so Dr. Funk, you can. Oh, she got that long URL.
Yeah.
Um, so if you are looking for her services, so you're taking clients now. Are you still
Yep.
open to clients?
Yeah, I'm still accepting clients in the state of Texas. I offer in-person services in Fort Worth, Texas, and as well as telehealth all throughout the state of Texas.
All right. So it's only for Texans. Sorry, guys, but for the Texans, um, I encourage you to check her out. Go visit her website, Paradise Psychology PLLC hyphen DRA Funk dot clientsecure.me. She has a long URL, but this information will be in the description. So in case you miss it, don't worry. It will be provided to you in the description. It's also scrolling below at the bottom of your screen. You could also give her a call at 682-273-8501. You could also follow her on Instagram and Facebook. Her account handle is Paradise Psychology PLLC, and she is also on LinkedIn. So I encourage you to follow her on LinkedIn, follow her on Instagram and Facebook. And if you happen to be either watching or listening and you are in the state of Texas, I encourage you to give her a call or reach out to her online. So if you're looking for some counseling services, you got some communication issues, your partner ain't listening to you, your friend ain't listening to you, you're having a dispute with your neighbor or whatever, any kind of issue, I encourage you to reach out to Dr. Funk. Her information is available to you scrolling below at the bottom of your screen. For my video people and for my audio people, this information is in the description. Dr. Funk, is there anything else you want to promote or anything you want to share about your services?
No, I think you covered it all.
All right, there you go. So I encourage you to reach out to her if you're looking for some counseling services. You got you got that one person in the group that is not pulling their weight, and you need some help, and you need some solutions. Reach out to her. Her information is available to you. Like I said, it is at on the at let me get my words. It's scrolling below at the bottom of your screen, or it is in the description. So however you are taking this in, this information is available to you. All right, Dr. Funk, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Fabulous. All right, I'll place you backstage. And whoa, I forgive me for just looking like I woke up. All right, so let me get my information up on the screen. All right, you guys, we have reached the conclusion of our episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. I encourage you to stay in touch with us, right? So follow us on our social media. We are on a lot of different platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and there's a few others that's not coming to me right now. But we are all over social media. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us. I encourage you to follow us. And let us know what you thought about this episode by leaving a comment in the comment section below or in the comment thread. I definitely will appreciate your feedback. And if you happen to be listening to this on audio, whether that is on Spotify or iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any kind of podcast, if you happen to be listening, please drop us a rating. It will help us a lot when you do. So please drop us a rating. Let us know what your feedback is on our episodes as well as our podcast. So please give us your feedback. It is very much appreciated. And I just want to let you know that our podcast is a production of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So if you are maybe looking for a tutor, for your child or even for yourself, because we also work with adults, please reach out to us. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You can also send us an email, success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. And you can also give us a call at 347-762-2838. So I encourage you to reach out to us. If you're looking for tutoring services, reach out to us. Our information is available to you. I will give our website again, www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. And finally, I know I'm running through this. Finally, I want to let you know that Hot Topics has a text list. I encourage you to sign up. You will learn anything and everything there is about hot topics, when our upcoming live episodes, when we drop that audio, you will learn everything that is coming up about hot topics. So I encourage you to sign up for our text list. All you have to do is text the code hot topics to 917-764-3975. Again, just text the code hot topics to 917-764-3975. All right, you guys, and that is it. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Thank you again, you guys. Now I'm signing off. Bye.